Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to pull out the key insights from sources you've shared. And today, we're tackling Alain Badiou's The True Life, thanks to one listener's suggestion.
That's right. Our mission is to really get into what Badiou means by a true life, especially thinking about young people today and, well, all the challenges and opportunities they face.
And it gets quite specific, doesn't it? Looking at the different paths or maybe fates of boys and girls in our current world.
Exactly. Badiou dives into identity, societal pressures, this whole idea of tradition fading away. It's definitely thought-provoking stuff.
He really sets the tone early on by bringing up Socrates, the philosopher put on trial for corrupting the youth.
Yeah, it grabs your attention straight away. Makes you think, okay, this isn't going to be a standard discussion.
So let's unpack that. Corrupting the youth.
Yeah.
What did that actually mean in Socrates' time? Because Badiou argues it wasn't about money or power struggles in the way we might first assume.
Not really, no. Badiou is quite clear. Socrates wasn't charging fees, unlike some others back then. He shared his ideas freely. So, not about financial gain.
Okay. And not about conventional morality either.
Well, Badiou points out that Socrates, or at least Plato's Socrates, actually advocated for a kind of love that was about intellectual and spiritual connection, going beyond just the physical. So maybe even the opposite of moral corruption in that sense.
Right. So if it wasn't money, it wasn't typical morality. Was it about him trying to gain influence, maybe build a power base with these young followers?
Again, Badiou kind of pushes back on that. He reminds us how critical Plato was of tyranny and the lust for power. The idea is that true philosophers are, or should be, disinterested in politics in that way.
So the corruption, it was something else entirely. What was the real issue, according to Badiou's reading?
The real issue, Badiou argues, was that Socrates was shaking things up. He was questioning everything, prejudices, assumptions, blind obedience to custom.
So challenging the status quo.
Exactly. He was telling young people, essentially, don't just follow the path laid out for you. Think for yourselves. Imagine a different way to live. A true life, as Badiou puts it.
That's a powerful idea. Not leading them astray, but encouraging critical thinking, envisioning something new. Okay, so Badiou then talks about these two big inner enemies that can pull young people away from finding this true life.
Yes, two fundamental temptations, you could say. The first is this intense desire for immediate gratification.
Like living just for the moment, pleasure, fun, that sort of thing.
Precisely. Just chasing fleeting experiences, constant amusement. Badiou links this to a kind of nihilism where life doesn't build towards anything meaningful. It's just disconnected moments.
And he connects that to the death drive. That sounds pretty heavy.
Yeah, he suggests that focusing only on immediate pleasure, drawing on Plato and Freud, can paradoxically undermine the will to live a substantial life. It's a kind of subtle self-destruction.
Wow, okay. That idea of instant gratification leading to emptiness definitely resonates. What's the second enemy?
The second one is almost the flip side. It's the passion for success within the current system.
So ambition, wanting wealth, status, power.
Exactly. Playing the game, following the rules, elite schools, corporate ladders, basically, achieving success as defined by the existing social order. A kind of conservatism in a way.
Got it. So this constant push and pull, burn bright now or build for later within the established structure. Badiou then uses some historical figures to illustrate how we've always had conflicting views about youth. Hugo versus Nizan, for example.
Right. He shows this tension isn't new. You've got Victor Hugo with this very romantic, triumphant view. Youth is this glorious dawn, full of potential. Our mornings rise triumphantly.
Yeah, very poetic. But then Paul Nizan just cuts through it. I was 20. I won't let anyone say those are the best years of your life. Pretty blunt.
It really is.
Yeah.
Nizan throws cold water on that idealization, suggesting youth is often difficult, maybe even disappointing because of these very pressures and temptations we're talking about.
And Arthur Rimbaud becomes this sort of central, emblematic figure for Badiou in exploring this whole conflict.
Absolutely. Badiou sees Rimbaud as the poet of youth, someone who felt and wrote about both sides incredibly vividly. He starts with that line from A Season in Hell.
Once, if I remember well, my life was a feast where all hearts opened and all wines flowed. Captures that initial rush, doesn't it?
Perfectly. That feeling of infinite possibility, of pure sensation. But then later in the same work, the tone shifts dramatically.
Yeah, that lament. Had I not once a lovely youth, heroic, fabulous, to be written on sheets of gold? There's such a sense of loss, of something squandered.
Exactly. And Badiou tracks Rimbaud's turn away from that, away from being the angel or seer, exempt from all morality, as Rimbaud put it.
Towards duty, towards reality.
Yes, return to the soil with the duty to seek and rough reality to embrace. It's a conscious shift.
And then he gives up poetry altogether, goes for ardent patience, ends up an arms dealer in Africa. It's quite a trajectory.
It really is. Badiou uses it to show the extremes, the overwhelming power of living purely for the moment, and then the perhaps equally fraught path of trying to build a conventional life.
So, bringing this historical perspective to bear, how does Badiou see youth today? He mentions some apparent positives, like more freedom.
Yeah, he acknowledges that arguably young people in the West today have more freedom than ever before. Freedom to, as he puts it, burn up their lives with immediate experiences or to build them through ambition.
And those old, rigid initiation rites, mandatory military service, maybe arranged marriage in some contexts, they're mostly gone, right?
Largely faded, yes. Those clear, often harsh transitions into adulthood aren't really there in the same way, which means fewer constraints from traditional expectations.
Plus, the whole value placed on age seems flipped. It's all about the cult of youth now.
Definitely. Youth is often idealized, and older people feel pressure to stay young, look young, act young. Badiou makes a wry comment about seeing older folks decked out in sportswear trying to keep up.
He also notes that on the surface, maybe youth seems less divided, more people going for higher education, like the Bonne Marche in France. But he hints at new divisions.
Right. While more people might be getting degrees, he suggests new dividing lines have emerged based on where you live, your background, your culture, maybe even your consumption habits. These will be less obvious, but just as deep.
Okay, but this increased freedom, this lack of clear initiation, it seems to have a downside. Badiou calls it endless adolescence.
That's a key point. Without those clear markers defining adulthood, it's easier to get stuck in a kind of prolonged adolescence. And it also contributes, he thinks, to a pluralization of adults. Adults chasing youth through consumerism, blurring the lines.
And this lack of structure, it makes society nervous, more anxious about what young people are doing.
Yeah, Badiou argues that the decline of traditional controls leads to more societal fear about youth being disoriented, maybe even dangerous. He sees things like increased surveillance or new laws aimed at youth as symptoms of this fear.
And he connects this to a really serious problem. Society not providing enough meaningful work, especially for youth in marginalized areas.
Absolutely. Lack of opportunity makes everything harder. It fuels the perception of some youth, particularly in poorer neighborhoods, as this dangerous class. He also notes a worrying split between, say, student protesters and kids involved in riots and housing projects, a sign that youth isn't one unified group.
This all seems linked to what he calls the abandonment of the world of tradition. What does he mean by that, and what kind of crisis does it cause?
The world of tradition for Badiou was characterized by strong, clear authority structures, often quite strict, that guided young people. The freedoms today signal we've left that world. But this departure, driven by capitalism and modernity, creates what he calls a subjective crisis. Young people struggle to find their bearings, their place, without those old signposts.
And this isn't just about, say, financial crises, which we hear about all the time. It's deeper.
He thinks so. While finance capitalism has its own built-in instability, the real crisis is this loss of shared meaning, this difficulty in symbolizing our place in the world and our relationships. He uses those stark global wealth inequality figures, 10% owning 86%, 1% owning nearly half, to show the extreme context of this disorientation.
It makes the scale of the economic reality very clear. He even critiques the Occupy movement slogan, "We are the 99%. Why?"
He felt it papered over crucial differences within that 99%. The gap between someone middle class in a rich country and someone truly destitute elsewhere is huge. He argues that slogan didn't capture the real complexities and potential conflicts within the non-elite.
Okay, so tradition is fading, leaving this symbolic void. How does Marx's analysis from the Communist Manifesto fit in here for Badiou?
Badiou finds Marx incredibly relevant here, especially Marx's description of how the bourgeoisie tore down feudal ties, leaving only self-interest and cash payment. He quotes that famous line.
All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned.
And man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. Badiou sees this as key to understanding the abandonment of tradition.
And how does this relate specifically to symbolization and youth disorientation?
Badiou's point is that old hierarchies, however unjust, did provide a symbolic system for understanding differences in roles. Capitalism swept those away, but didn't replace them with a meaningful egalitarian symbolism. Instead, we got what he calls the asymbolic reign of economic forces.
Meaning everything gets valued based on money.
Pretty much. Economic value becomes the main way we understand things, people, relationships. And this lack of deeper shared symbols is what causes the crisis and leaves young people, in particular, feeling adrift.
So, faced with this crisis, Badiou sees two main reactionary responses emerging. What are they, and why does he think they're dangerous?
The first is basically doubling down on the current system, defending Western-style capitalism and its freedoms, often presented as the only option. He sometimes calls this the desire for the West.
Okay, defending the status quo.
Yeah.
And the second?
The second is the opposite impulse, a desire to go back, to return to older, hierarchical ways of symbolizing identity, often through things like religious fundamentalism, nationalism, racism, or even a very aggressive kind of individualism.
And both are dead ends.
He argues yes, they both fail to address the root problem and ultimately lead to more conflict and division. They're reactions, not real solutions.
So what is the true contradiction we should be focused on, according to Badiou?
The real tension, he says, is between this dominant, a symbolic Western capitalism that creates inequality and disorientation, and the potential for what he calls communism, not necessarily the historical states, but the ongoing project of creating a truly egalitarian symbolization, a just way of living together with shared meaning.
And young people are central to this.
Very much so. He sees them as being most directly impacted by the loss of tradition and the pull of those false reactionary responses. But because of that, they're also in a unique position to invent something new.
To create this new egalitarian symbolism.
Exactly. To find ways of relating and understanding the world that oppose both the cold calculations of capitalism and the appeal of reactive, often fascistic identities. He urges us, and maybe especially young people, to be attentive.
Attentive to what? Signs of change.
Signs of new possibilities. In the world around us, yes, but also in our own lives. Moments of intense connection, falling in love, getting involved in a political movement, feeling inspired by art or science. These experiences might hold clues.
Which links back to that tension between burning up and building a life. He suggests a kind of guided wandering.
Yeah, not just drifting aimlessly, but actively searching, exploring. Using those moments of intensity, not just for fleeting pleasure, but as starting points for finding or creating these new symbols, new ways of living together.
He uses a poem, St. John Perce's Anabasis, as a metaphor for this journey. Can you explain that?
Anabasis literally means a journey inland or upward, but it often implies a difficult return. Badiou connects it to the historical Anabasis by Xenophon, the story of Greek mercenaries stranded deep in Persia who fought their way back home.
Their famous cry when they finally saw the sea. Thalassa.
Exactly. That cry symbolized their return, their identity. So Badiou uses the poem as a metaphor for youth's journey.
Yeah.
Being lost, disoriented, but undertaking this difficult movement back towards something authentic, maybe affirming tradition, but in a totally new way.
And those lines he quotes from the poem's end, they seem to emphasize potential and navigation.
Yes, lines like, many omens on the way, many seeds on the way, and my thought is not heedless of the navigator. It suggests a journey through a vast, challenging world, but one where careful thought and attention can chart a course towards a new kind of harvest, a new future. The world needs to change, he suggests, and young people are the ones creating the necessary new thinking.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Badiou then focuses specifically on the contemporary fate of boys. He brings in Freud's ideas about the father figure. How does that work?
He uses Freud's framework, the idea of the primal father, the son's rebelling, leading to the establishment of law, as a kind of baseline for traditional male development. But his main point is that this whole dynamic is broken now.
Broken how? What's wrong with the father-son relationship today?
Badiou argues that the traditional father figure is weakened on multiple fronts. The real father might even envy the son's youth in our culture. And the symbolic father, the embodiment of law and authority, is overshadowed by the impersonal market. The father figure risks becoming just, imaginary, without real clout.
And this has big consequences for how boys form their identity. He talks about youth gangs as a fatherless horde.
Yes, he sees gangs not as a true rebellion leading to a new order, but as lacking that foundational conflict with a strong father figure. Their unity is often based more on shared consumerism or rivalry, a kind of stationary nomadism stuck in repetition, maybe even driven by that death drive we mentioned earlier.
So the usual steps, challenging the father, submitting to the law, getting initiated, they don't work the same way.
Pretty much disrupted. Aggression doesn't have a clear symbolic target. Submission can become just apathy or surface conformity, and initiation isn't really a transition to adulthood, but maybe just absorption into the gang's static world. Reconciliation often happens, Badiou says, through the infantilization of the adult acting like kids.
Which leads to this uncertainty of the son's identity. What's the main cause of that uncertainty for Badiou?
He pins it on the overwhelming pressure to just be a consumer, a player in the marketplace. Society's focus on commodities and economic function makes it hard for young men to develop a stable sense of self beyond that.
And this leads him to identify three main paths, or maybe outcomes, for these disinitiated sons. The perverted body, the sacrificed body, and the deserving body. Can we unpack those?
Sure. The perverted body is marked by the breakdown tattoos, drugs, piercings, a kind of detached or pornographic sexuality. It's a body without strong guiding ideas.
Okay. Then the sacrificed body.
That's the reaction toward tradition, often in an extreme, violent way. Think religious extremism, the terrorist figure seeking a return to a lost order through self-sacrifice.
And finally, the deserving body.
This is the son who conforms, who plays by the market's rules, focuses on building a career, becomes a good, productive citizen within the current system.
And he links these types to real-world events like unrest in French suburbs or Greece.
Yeah, he sees those events as symptoms of how society treats those who aren't deserving bodies. The clash between police and youth who don't fit the compliant, career-focused mold is significant for him.
It's striking that he even sees the deserving body, the careerist, as potentially a form of nihilism, just hidden. He also mentions the end of military service.
Right. He reflects on conscription as a major state-sponsored initiation rite for boys in the past, a break from childhood, instilling discipline, shared identity. Its decline leaves a symbolic gap.
Can school fill that gap?
He questions it, and he suggests this instability in young men's identities might even be a sign of the state itself weakening in its ability to provide symbolic cohesion, which leaves us, he thinks, with a stark choice. Reinvent a shared purpose communism in his terms, or face barbarism.
But it's not all doom and gloom. He does offer a way forward beyond these three limiting bodies.
Definitely. He points towards new truths as guides, like reinvented love challenging the perverted body, disinterested political action countering the sacrificed body, and genuine creativity art, science resisting the conformism of the deserving body. He finds hints of this in Rimbaud, too.
And quotes Rimbaud again. His body. The dreamed of release, the shattering of grace crossed with new violence as a kind of inspiration for a new initiation.
Exactly. A way to rethink the son's potential. And he sees philosophy's role here as continuing that Socratic tradition, corrupting youth by pushing them to think beyond these limited categories.
Okay, let's turn to the contemporary fate of girls. Badiou starts carefully here, acknowledging he's a man talking about women's experiences. He even asks if there is a specific girl question anymore.
He contrasts it with the past, where the girl question was so tied up with marriage and becoming a mother. Now, thanks largely to feminism pushing for autonomy, it's different.
He mentions those traditional out-of-place figures like the unwed mother or the old maid.
Right, figures who existed outside the standard daughter-wife-mother track. They showed, Badiou argues, that women could occupy other spaces even if society marginalized them. They were like a glitch in the system.
But today, he argues, a girl's life isn't just about who she'll marry. Feminism changed that.
Fundamentally, the drive for female autonomy, independent of men, has reshaped everything.
He contrasts the girl-woman separation, traditionally bridged by marriage men, with the son-father separation, about symbolic control, and that old 2-to-1 power imbalance.
Yeah, things like old marriage laws where husbands had all the power, or how women were often confined to the role of reproduction, position between the male worker and soldier.
But now, with family structures changing, girls have more options work, different kinds of relationships, motherhood outside marriage.
The possibilities have definitely expanded. Those old stigmas have weakened hugely.
So the big question becomes, if girls aren't defined mainly by marriage anymore, what does define their existence? And are they disoriented like the boys?
Badiou suggests a different dynamic. While boys might get stuck in a kind of prolonged childhood, lacking direction or ideas, girls often face a kind of premature womanhood.
Premature? How so?
Without that clear traditional separation, the figure of the adult woman kind of reflects back onto the girl. They seem to become women very quickly, sometimes carrying an anxiety about that prematurity.
He notices girls presenting as young women, concerned with adult things already. And this affects symbols like virginity.
Right. If girls are already seen as women, the symbol of virginity loses its traditional meaning as marking the before state. He also points to girls often doing better academically than boys, even in tough environments, as evidence of this perhaps precocious maturity.
So the girl question basically becomes the woman question.
Mm.
And how does he see modern capitalism oppressing differently based on gender?
He thinks the main imperative today isn't direct subordination, but promoting this idea. Live without ideas, just consume, be quiet. But it plays out differently. For boys, it makes it hard to become adults. For girls, it makes it hard to remain girls. They're pushed into this cynical, premature womanhood. Society wants consumers, or silence from non-consumers, and both require not thinking too much for yourself.
A contrast to the old way. Live with this idea, tradition, and no other. He even throws out that provocative image.
A herd of stupid adolescent boys led by smart career women. It's exaggeration maybe, but it paints a picture of a world focused on things, not ideas, which he suggests suits capitalism quite well.
He then revisits traditional feminine archetypes. Servant, seductress, lover, saint. The female square.
Yeah, but he stresses that dynamism is in the pairs, the relationships between them. He argues woman, in traditional symbolism, often represented this passing between two states, which subtly challenged the singular male one, like God or the law.
The feminine as going beyond of the one in the form of a passing between two. That's why women were maybe kept hidden. Their existence challenged the necessity of the ultimate one.
That's his reading. Traditional oppression tried to contain that power of the two within those four roles. But now capitalism brings new pressures.
Pressures towards unification, the woman one.
Exactly. Capitalism wants to replace the old one of symbolic authority with a new one of competitive individualism. And it urges the girl woman to be a particularly tough, mature embodiment of this.
And he's critical of some feminism here, bourgeois, authoritarian feminism.
He critiques strands of feminism that, in his view, just want women to take over the existing system, to become the new one within capitalism, rather than changing the system itself. This, he fears, undermines that powerful two-ness.
So figures like the dangerous seductress or the mystical saint fade away.
They get flattened, he suggests. Seduction becomes a career tool, love a contract. The sublime gets lost in practical achievement. The individualistic one takes over. He even speculates this could make women more individualistic than men under these conditions.
Which brings him back to reproduction as the central issue today.
Yeah, all the social issues around childbearing. He notes some bourgeois feminism can seem hostile to motherhood, seeing it as the last trace of the servant role.
But there's a contradiction.
Well, rejecting a maternal instinct fits the individualistic woman one, but if everyone refused childbearing, extinction. So even this modern woman one, he says, remains a servant to humanity's continuation, creating a subjective problem for her.
So what's the way forward? Beyond tradition, beyond this capitalist woman one?
He says we have to accept the old figures are gone, but reject this new role as capitalism's reserve army. He believes women will ultimately subvert the one they're pushed towards.
It requires a philosophical shift, creating new symbols.
Yes. Finding a new understanding of the feminine outside of capitalism's demands, including, crucially, finding new ways to symbolize childbearing beyond just biological function.
And this connects to thinking truths without transcendence. Assuming God is dead, paternal authority weakened.
He thinks this inevitably leads to a sexuation of thinking. How does a woman engage with politics, art, science, love, philosophy now, without those old guarantees? How are these fields changed when women bring the power of egalitarian symbol creation to them?
So women are already working on this in a new in-between place.
That's the idea, actively creating new ways of thinking and being that subvert the dominant one. He ends with that Valerie quote.
Beautiful heaven, true heaven, look how I change.
A line full of transformation and potential.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into Badiou, we've seen his analysis of the really unique spot young people are in today. Trying to find a true life after the breakdown of tradition, facing all these pressures from capitalism.
And those quite distinct paths he sketches out for boys, struggling with identity uncertainty, and girls facing this push towards a kind of premature individualistic womanhood.
The core message seems to be this urgent need for a new egalitarian way of creating meaning, a new symbolization, and young people are absolutely key to that.
They're the ones, he suggests, who can move beyond both the limits of the past and the emptiness of the present market logic.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to chew on. In this world, caught between tradition's ghosts and modernity's speed, what does it actually mean for you to forge a true life, something to reflect on your own place in these dynamics and your potential to help shape something new.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.